Hello everyone. This video is to explain how to use relative data validation for dynamic dependent drop-down lists without the use of named ranges or scripts. Before I start, I wanted to thank Jason Juritich for his video on the subject. He did a nice video using a Google script that he created, as well as the use of named ranges, and this data array right here is very similar to what he used. I changed some of the letters and the color coding, but essentially it's the same thing that he used. Just I don't want to change too much of what he did, because what he did was pretty much perfect in that regard. The purpose of this video is to kind of walk you through all the steps that it would take to create this without going the script route, just to show that it's possible, and also to show that you can do it with large amounts of data if you need to. It doesn't just work with a small amount. I think it's very efficient if you can understand how the formulas work, and once you understand how they work, you can tweak them to meet your needs and expand them also to meet your needs. So anyways, to start off, I'm going to start over here on cell A2. Right now there's a data validation already set up, and I can show you how that works a little bit later, but right now it's set so that if I select this cell here, I have options A, B, and C, which pull directly from this column here. If I were to go to data validation, you can see that over here, column O is where the data is pulling from. Now this is not a relative validation. This is just a strict absolute validation. That's really all you need. What's nice about it is I don't have to add any kind of name ranges or anything. I can just add another letter to this row, and then when I go to the primary group, it will appear again. And if I erase it, it'll go back to normal. So the way I have it set up right now is once I select this, I'm able to pull data from a subgroup. So let's say within A, the subgroups would be these three right here. So I'm able to select those. And then within that, I have a subgroup. So if I go to AB, and look within those, I'll see these three options. And if I go here, I'm able to select those. Okay, so this works pretty much the same way as a few other versions online on YouTube. More specifically, Jason's, like I mentioned before. But the way that mine works is through the use of, like I mentioned, relative data validation. And it also uses something called HLOOKUP. So I'm actually going to kind of walk you through that a little bit right now. So I made a couple little helper columns and cells that are really not necessary, but only for the purpose of instruction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how the subgroup is populated. Subgroup data validation is populated. So essentially what it does is every time I select this cell here, if I select a letter, what's happening is there's an HLOOKUP function that's running as well, that's looking for this value, and it's looking for it within this data array. So let me explain more specifically how that works. So actually I'm going to open this up right now. So if I click on, let's say A, this is what would show up as far as the data array. So if I select, let's say B, you'll see that these letters here have changed. If I select C, these letters will change. And how is it doing that? Well, right now this is currently using an array formula. Let me actually go to a different page where it's populating. Okay, so if I click here, what's going on is this row, this first row here of this sheet, corresponds to this row here of this sheet. So the reason why I did this is I can add 1,000 more rows or 10,000 more rows, or anything within the 2 million cell limit for Google spreadsheets, and I'm able to have all that information copied down. Okay, so let me go back here to look at the specific formula of how it's working. Okay, I'm actually going to break it down on the other page, but I'm using a combination of if error and HLOOKUP, plus also I'm using a column function. I can explain that as well. So before I actually dig into this formula and explain, let me get this out of the way. Before I explain all the details, let me explain each of them individually for example. So I'm actually going to go over here and expand this. Okay, so going to hide this for a moment. I'm going to explain each function fairly briefly. Let's open this really quick. Okay, so how this works, let me explain the column function first. With the way the column function is first, and I'll show you how it works later within the formula. Column function is it's simple. If you look at this example, what it does is if you type in the column function and then you enter in a cell, or you could actually leave it, you could leave this part here blank, but you use the open and close parentheses. What it'll do is it'll return a numerical value based on the column that you select, or the row. The column that it's in. So for example, I put column N9 and N9, which is right here, and the result would be 14 because N is the 14th letter of the alphabet, and so it'll return that number. If I were to put it, if I put it in A9 or A20, it would return 1 because it's looking for the A reference. It's looking for that column reference. Okay, the HLOOKUP function is a little bit more complex. The way it works is, these are just the Google definitions. It searches across the first row of a range for a key and returns the value of that specified cell. So I'll try to explain it in as many layman's terms as I can. So if you look at this is the text here within the formula that I wrote, and here's the result over here. So the way it works is this first term here within the function, it's the item that you're searching for. So right now I want to look within this data right here. If you can see this right here, A8 through Y13, that's A8 through 13. Actually, I erased that row, but let's just say it's there. What it's going to do is it's going to search within this array, and it's going to look on the first row, and it's going to go until it finds the term Google definition, which is right here. And then once you've decided which array you want, this number 3 here actually correlates to a row. So it's going to return a value if there is such a column here called Google definition. It'll return the third row within this array, whatever information is in that third row of that column. So to follow the whole protocol, Google definition, it'll go here, then it'll go down 1, 2, 3, and then you'll get this information. So if I were to go here and change it, let's say to 2, it would show this information: return the column number of a specified cell. Okay, so that's how that works, and that's essentially how it's almost like a search function to a certain extent. And lastly, this if error function. This is just something that I'm tacking on to the beginning of the HLOOKUP formula. The reason why it's important is because in the event that, let's say, I'm trying to look for the term Google definition, or I'm trying to search for a specific subgroup or subgroup, and that does not exist, there's some sort of an error, the if error function it'll automatically turn an any error message into a blank, or whatever you want to call it. So for example, if I go over here and I want to search this text here, and I want to search for the word zebra, but the word zebra doesn't exist. So if you look at the result here, see, it says in search evaluation cannot find zebra within return. So you don't want if you're doing any kind of like sum or sum if functions, you don't want the value errors to show up because it might affect your formulas. Okay, so all I have to do is really just tack on if error in the beginning, and then another end parentheses on the end. That's it. So just if error open parentheses, and then the end parentheses at the end. So that's it, and then it'll return this value, okay, which is blank. And you can add, if you want, you can add something else to the end of it. So instead of it showing a blank, you can put in between these two parentheses here, you can put a comma and then something in quotations like the word error or something like that. Okay, but that's really up to your preference. Okay, so now that you hopefully understand these functions, I'm going to hide these rows so I can focus up here. All right, so now let me show you specifically how the HLOOKUP works. So I'm going to open this up here and show you this is the data validation reference. Essentially, it's just pulling the information from this sheet and putting it onto this sheet, just so they're right next to each other. It's easier to visualize. So when I select, let's say, this letter C here, what it's doing is the formula is the HLOOKUP is searching this data field in here, from here, right, all the way off beyond what you can see off screen. Okay, so it searches the first row, and it searches for the letter C. Once it finds that letter C, it takes all the information here and essentially transposes it across here. Hopefully that makes sense. And then inside here, what this is set up to do is this data validation is pulling information from this row here. So if I erase C, nothing will show up in the reference. Okay, if I select A, it'll search for A, and once it finds A, it'll show that information. Now, what's good about this too is there's subgroups and there's subgroups. You can add subgroups or subgroups. You can add as many subgroups as you want to. All you need to do is just create another reference sheet. Okay, this is a subgroup reference sheet. You said this is the subgroup reference sheet. Okay. What's nice about it also is because you're using the HLOOKUP function, you can add, say, within a subgroup. Let's say you want, in this case, let's say it's not quite even. Like these subgroups here only have 3, and this one maybe has 4. You can see when I added it, this 4th one popped up. Okay. Okay, and if I delete it, these could be like pricing options or maybe model options for a refrigerator or something like that. And then perhaps, let's say this, AD gets discontinued, so you delete it, and so now it's no longer something that you can select within the data validation. Okay, and I'll show you the relative data validation a little bit later. Okay, let me go into the specific, actually the formula itself and show you how it works. So I'm going to click on this one here. So here's the if error, like I mentioned. Okay, this is just the I put the space here on the end, which I'll just take off because it's really not necessary. Okay, so if error, going to kind of ignore that for a moment. A good look at this HLOOKUP. So HLOOKUP is it's looking for this value here, group selection A2. So if you want to go to group selection A2. Here we are on the group selection sheet, A2. So it's looking for this searching for this term. Where is it searching for the term? It's searching for it in this array, in this range, Q2 through AE6. Okay, so that would be right here, Q2 through AE6. And that I apologize, it kind of goes off screen, but searches within this range. Okay. And then once it finds that range, now this is where the column function comes to hand. I'll try to explain this the best I can. What it's doing is I'm trying to have it return. I'm trying to have it return each row. So if I'm say, for example, look, it searches for A. I want it to find the this would be the first row. I want to return the value for the 2nd row of it, the 3rd row, the 4th row, 5th row, etc. So the way that it does that, and you can do however you want. You could just, if you want, you could just type in the number 2, and it'll return the same value. Okay, if you go to this formula here, you can just instead of putting column +1, you can put the number 3. The reason why I did that, it just makes it easier to copy down. Remember, like I said, the column function will it'll tell you the number of the column within your sheet. So if I say column, if I just highlight this, it should say 1 because that's the first column. So 1 plus 1 would be 2. This will return the second column. So if I do the same formula, if this is the exact same formula, why is it that it's showing AB instead of AA? Well, it's progressively adding 1 more each time. So even though it says column, the value of column, this function here would say 2 because it's the second column. So this is kind of a little cheap way to get the data within an array without having to enter in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I were to add more rows to the right, more columns to the right, I could add, what are 50, 60 columns. All I have to do is just copy this 1 column here and paste it, and it'll change everything automatically. I don't have to do 4 and 5 and 6 and so on and so forth by hand. That would be just a little bit too tedious. So you can play around with this if you like, but I think it's about as simple as it needs to be. Okay, and then this isn't really not important. This is just saying whether the data is sorted or not. So just type in the word false. You can go and try to study it a little bit further, but this really is an optional bit of information. You don't really even need it anyways. So I think that's should hopefully explain how that works. Within this subgroup, much the same thing is working as well. So I click on subgroup, let's say AA, and then you'll see over here, these are the possible options that pop up. And now I'll just kind of scroll over here so you can see them. AA, and the subgroup options are AA1, AA2, AA3, and sure enough, they show up here. And I'm able to select them. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now let me actually get to the data validation part itself. This is the part that's a little bit tricky, and hopefully will work. It's been working pretty well so far, but I know Jason mentioned that it might be something that's not consistent. It might be just something that gets in the next version of Google Spreadsheets. It might get edited, so this might be kind of irrelevant after a while. But so far, it seems to work. The standard validation would be I click on. Actually, let me go to this first one here. Actually, I did that. I'm sorry. Standard validation would be click on this cell here. I go to data validation, and I select a field. So right now, let's say subgroups A2 through D2. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to go down to the subgroups tab, and here's A2 through D2, like we mentioned. Okay, but the problem with standard data validation or absolute data validation is if I try to take this and copy it down, it'll only reference this row. So if I'm selecting, let's say B, I want the options here to be these ones here. If I select here, I want the options to be here. But normally what it would do is if you try to copy it down, no matter what cell you go into along this column, it's going to pull data from only up here. It's absolute. It doesn't pull. It doesn't go relatively as you copy down. Okay. So, but as you can see here, it's pulling relative. How did that work? Well, I'll show you right now. So if I go to data validation, it looks pretty much like a normal data validation. But what you do is you add a $ in front of the columns, each of the columns, and it is kind of counterintuitive to anyone who knows how to use absolute and relative. But this actually would make it absolute if you use these $. But in this case, it's doing the opposite. I don't know why it works, but it works. Maybe it was done on purpose, but I don't know of anyone else that was able to find this out. I haven't seen any other tutorials on it anywhere on YouTube or anywhere else, but it seems to work. So if I click save, and then I copy it, and then I paste data validation, seems to work. So I do the same thing here. All things I would do with subgroups. So I would click on here, data validation, subgroups A2 through D2, but instead of absolute, I'll make it relative by adding these dollar signs in front of it. I'll click save, take it, copy it down. Oops. Sorry. Copy it down, and then AA1, I selected BB, so you should have BB variations, and then CB. Over here I should have the CB variations. So that's about it. I try my best to explain it. I know it's there's a lot of complex things going on. The script, for me, this is much easier, but I can understand how the script version is a lot easier if you're just trying to get the job done, but you don't really need to understand how it works. I think you should go with Jason Juratich, his version. But for me, I don't like to just, I don't like to just type in a script and not understand how it works, because then I can't tweak it to my specifications. I can't do any kind of variation on it. So if you'd like to engineer your own, you can do it this way. It's a little bit complex, but once you understand how it works, it's actually fairly simple. And then you can you understand the protocol. You can tweak it to your own liking. Now, one of the things, last thing I'll mention is that what's good about this is there's no named ranges. If I want to create groups and subgroups and subgroups, it's just a matter of coming in here, adding another row, adding another. So adding more, sorry, I'm going to add the primary groups here. Adding another group, adding the subgroup, adding, you can't see it because it's off screen right now, but adding subgroups. Sorry. So it's a little off screen. So anyways, I just added a primary group, a subgroup within that, and then you can't see on the far right, but I added some subgroups. So let's see if it works. If I go over here, now there's a D primary group, D subgroup, and subgroup. So you can add on to it pretty easily. This is scalable for mass data, so leave any comments. I'd be happy to make another short video explaining other things. I tried my best to explain it, but let me know if there's something else I can do to make it more efficient.